Hey guys, and welcome to another episode in the combat series. In this episode we're going to be taking a look at a melee skill, a melee attack, and how we can program that in Godot. And more specifically, we're going to be taking a look at a cone shaped attack in which several enemies can be hit within the same strike. So that's what we'll be doing in this episode. Hope you're ready. Let's get started. Do you want to learn how to design and make games? Or maybe you want to learn more about how Godot works? Then subscribe to this channel and don't forget to hit that little bell icon to make sure you don't miss out on anything. Also, if you're interested in the game development that I do myself, or you want to ask any questions directly instead of using the comment box down below, you can join me on my Twitch channel. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The schedule and time zones and the link, they're all down in the description below. I'll see you there. Now let's get started. Now, to get started with our melee attack, we first have to determine how far the melee strike will reach the moment we are attacking. For that, we're going to go to the player scene, and on the player we are adding a area 2D, and I've renamed this to melee range. I've prepared this scene a little bit. We're going to go over most of it together, but I've done this so I can already program some of the animations so that we can skip ahead of time a little bit and make this video as short and as concise as possible. So I have a area 2D, you can see it right here. It's a small circle, that's the collision shape. And for the collision shape, we're going to be taking a look at several factors. So I've already determined that I want the collision shape to be 65 in diameter. But as you can see, we are working with isometric art. So if you're working with a top-down situation, you're fine, you're golden, you're done. But for isometric art, we have to turn this circle into an oval to correctly represent the isometric art we are drawing. I've already done that together with you. I think episode number 5 it was. I'll put it up in a card in the area of effect skill that we have programmed. But we have to do this within the melee skill as well. The thing is, if I would to add the factor of 0.5 on the y-axis, you can see that this oval just doesn't appear to be very well defining the area that we should be able to attack. You can see that the area, first of all, is drawn too high. We have more space on the top of the skeleton than we have below. And you should not see this from the head of the skeleton, but you should see this from about the midriff, because it is striking horizontally at around the height of the midriff. So we have to bring this area 2D a little bit down. Now I've been fiddling around with it a little bit, and for us it's about 9 that it works well, that it has about the same space on this side as it has on that side. Now that said, personally, and this is a personal developer choice of myself, this is not computer programming, game programming science, I think the scientific approach of making the y-axis or the y-pixels half the size is not going to create a good player experience. I feel like the player has much more reach left and right than he would have up and down. So I'm actually going to be increasing this a little bit by scaling it to 0.6 instead of 0.5. So I'm neglecting the scientific approach and I'm choosing the optimization of player experience approach. But yeah, this takes a lot of fiddling around and you'll just have to work. Still battling my cold. You will have to work around the numbers a little bit, test some things out, and even when you're done, you're still probably going to be taking a second look at this when you're balancing the game out. Now with that said, let's continue, and we actually have to do one more thing, and as we have to set the collision shape, the area to 2D, we have to disable it. The reason why we disable it is when we're walking around with our player character, walking next to walls, firing spells, healing ourselves, all of that stuff which is not the instant of a melee strike, that moment we don't want this collision shape to work. It's only going to drag the processor down. We'll constantly have to verify if there is an enemy in range, if the player is attacking, if it has a melee skill equipped, if that melee skill is of the right type, etc, etc, etc. So we don't want to be having this collision shape on all the time. We only want this collision shape to be on the moment we're attacking. So we're going to programming that in our animations, and that's up next. Now for the animations, I've already made a couple of them. I've already made 7 directional, we have 8 directional sprite sheet, so I've already programmed 7 of them. We only have to program the last one, the 8th one, to the direction southwest. We don't have that one yet. So let's do that together, and then you can see how I create the coalition shape to go on at the moment the strike happens. So we're going to create a new animation, and we'll call it attack southwest. And you can also call this bottom left or whatever you want. This is just the way I'm used to it. In our case, it's an animation of 0.4 seconds. We don't have to loop it. And you do this by, we add a track. And first of all, of course, we want to change the sprite sheet, and it's specifically the frame of the sprite sheet. And we'll add the keys. We have 4 frames for our attack. And we're going to be bringing that to frame 236. 237, frame 238, and of course I've looked this up before, so don't think that I know everything out of my head. And we can loop this for a moment. We can hide the melee range area to D. You can see, yes, that's the correct animation that we are expecting. So we can stop that. Now what we can do, we can add another track, and this track we're going to take the coalition shape to D of the melee range area to D. Now, then we can select the disabled property that we also had in the inspector. And here we can add the frames. And you can see it will add every frame with the setting we've set in the inspector. So that it is disabled. Disabled is on. But in this case, we're going to turn the disabled property, well, we're going to turn it back off, which means that it is on. It's a little bit counterintuitive. But now you can see if we turn this coalition shape on and the loop is still on, you can see that now the circle is grayed out because the coalition shape is off. You can see that it will turn blue every time the character is attacking. And in that small 0.2 seconds, only when we are attacking, this coalition shape is going to be on. And that's when we're going to receive the signals. We're going to filter those down. We're going to verify if the body is an enemy, and then we're going to apply the damage to the enemy. So that's what we're going to be doing next. However, before we're going to start with that actual piece of code to run the player or the enemy verification check, we have to run over a couple of things. And one of those things is the actual skill database that, of course, we have to extend. In this case, the green line is the new information within our skill database again. I'm going to go with a cleave skill, as that is very common for a cone-shaped strike with a multi-hit correct characteristics. I've decided to go for this one as I think it allows for some interesting piece of code. But do remember that you have many forms of melee skills. It may sound a little bit easy, but actually there's many options, just like with spells. You can have this cone attack. You can have a full circle swing, maybe even like a whirlwind attack. But there's also mechanics that we can program for single target skills that you actually have to right click a character, and that if your character is not close enough, your character will walk up to that enemy and then do the strike. I've not included that in this tutorial. If you're interested in that, then please let me know in the comments down below, and I'll consider making another tutorial episode of that. That being said, I've also chosen not to make this super elaborate and go over every single parameter that you can set. I entrust that you know enough now in this 10th episode of this combat series to do that yourself. So I'm only going to go with the damage value right here. And I've set all the other ones to not applicable. However, you could use the skill radius to maybe determine the extent to which our area 2D effect goes, like the 65 we've just set for the melee range of the radius of our circle. You could extend that with the skill radius here, and you can make it variable based on what's in this skill database. That's all up to you to determine, but that will be a good field to use. Also, I'm going to be hard coding 50 degrees of cone, but you could also add another parameter here, make it skill cone degrees or something like that, and say okay 50 or 25 or 35. Maybe even make an upgrade path for your skills that the cone becomes bigger and bigger. There's all kinds of options, but if you want those sort of variants within the skill possibilities, you can very easily code them into this database and add them in code to your skill instead of hard coding it like I'm doing right now. I'll leave that up to you, and if you want to see me do things like that, just leave it down in the comments below, but I think you can figure that out pretty easily. I trust you can. So I've updated this player skill. I've recompiled the JSON as I've taught you in the skill database episode, and of course I've added it to the game. So we have access to this information, we have cleave, and we have a melee attack. So let's have a look at the match command, and let's add the skill actually to the skill bar. And when we got those two things down, we can actually start coding the skill itself. So first of all, let's add the actual skill to our skill bar. So in the graphical user interface that we have programmed in past episodes, I'm going to be replacing one of these skills, let's say the fireball. I'm going to replace it with cleave so we have access to it. In order to make sure the cleave works, I've also added an icon for the cleave skill. So we have a little bit of a sword icon to indicate our player skill, our melee skill. Now on the player script, we need a couple of things. First of all, we need to know when we're in melee attack instead of just shooting. We're using the shooting variable right here, if you can remember from one of the episodes, to set the shooting animation. But now we don't want a shooting animation, we want an attacking animation. Especially since the attacking animation is what is going to turn on that area of effect, melee range. So we can actually start doing the hit calculations or the hit verifications. So I'm going to create a melee variable, and I'm going to set the default to false. Now what we also need, because in all the other skills, they were projectile skills or spells, and in those circumstances the damage is applied by the projectile, and the projectile was a separate scene. But in this case, the sword that our character has is part of our player. It's not a separate entity. They stay the same and they stay connected, and there's not a separate scene for a melee attack. So actually now we need the player itself to be able to deal the damage. So for that reason, I'm going to add a variable damage. Now in the match command, we of course have to make sure that the match function, the state function, state machine, can recognize the melee attack. So I'm adding melee attack right here, and that is of course from our skill type melee attack. And when it has a melee attack, it's going to go melee is true. So we're in melee attacking. So the animation knows, okay, you have the melee attack. And it's going to take the game data, the skill data, the selected skills, that would be cleave, and then skill damage. And then it's not declared in the current scope, but that probably is because here it's called data import. That's the proper singleton that we have to access. Now, once we have yielded a tree for the rate of fire, and the rate of fire is luckily the same 0.4 seconds that our melee skill is taking, we of course not only have to set shooting to false, but we also have to set that melee back to false so that we can go back into our running animation. Now, with that done, we can go into the animation and say, okay, that if shooting is true, animation mode is shoot. That's fine. Still battling a cold. The proper way to do this is to make a state machine, whether you're shooting or a melee attack. I'm not going to go all over that because that will add another 10 minutes on this episode, and you already know how to do all of that. And we're nearing the end of this series. I'm going to create a new series for the enemy logic. I think that's like a separate topic. So this is probably the last episode unless you request more melee attack skills to be programmed. But I will probably not get to that in probably 6 or 7 weeks. So shooting is being put on true here anyway. So normally in a state machine you won't have to do this, but right now I'm just going to double verify whether melee is turned to true here as well, and if so, I'm going to be changing it again. So if melee is true, then the anim mode is not shoot, but the anim mode is attack. Now we already know from this piece of code in which direction we are attacking, so we can already set the correct animation, or that's what these two lines do right here. They're already setting the correct animation. Now, of course, fire direction doesn't exactly sound like a melee attack. So probably what I would do if this was a real game and we were not at the end of this episode series, I would probably turn this into attack direction, and instead of can fire, I would have probably set it to can attack. So I would have probably adjusted the variables a little bit in their naming so that their naming still makes sense. And you're gonna run into that issue many times. If you think you can think up all the names of all your variables without having to change them ever, you're probably not made a lengthy development process yet. There's always variables that you want to change the name eventually. As soon as you feel like that would be good for your game, I advise you to do it immediately, because it will make changing, the longer you wait with changing, the more difficult it becomes. So now we have the melee attack, we are running the correct animation, and we are setting the damage out of that skill database, that 100 value that we have right there. So now we can start working on actually coding the skill, and to do that we're going to go to the coalition shape, or actually the melee range. We're going to go to node and we're going to say to body entered connect, and we connect it to the player. That creates this function right here, and under this function we're going to be programming what it should do the moment it is triggering a detection. So that detection would be while we're striking. So that's up next. Now, to make this function work properly, we have to do two things. First, we have to verify if the enemy or the thing that we hit is actually an enemy. And second, we have to verify if that enemy is within that cone-shaped radius that we're programming this area melee attack to be. So for that last part, because the first part is relatively easy, we're going to take the fire direction. And I know this would be in continuing series, I would have changed the name into attack direction everywhere. But right now it's fire direction, and we're going to use it. So this is getting the angle between the player position and the mouse cursor the moment the attack is triggered. And basically what we want to do is we want to add 25 degrees to the left and the right of that to create that cone shape. Now, in order to do that, we're going to make use of a little bit of code. That first we verify, like I said, if that body that we have that we get from the signal, if that is actually in the node group of enemies. All our enemies are in a node group called enemies. And then we get the angle of the player and the body position, if that is smaller than the fire direction plus 25, and that same angle between the player and the body position is bigger than the fire direction minus 25, and this is all in degrees, so that will be 25 degrees. In that case, we're going to take the body, so that will be the enemy that comes from the signal, and we're going to run its on hit function, and we're going to push the damage value that of course we get out of our database. So let's have a look how this actually looks. In the game, you can see the gray area of our area 2D of the melee skill. When I select the melee skill, you can actually see with the collision shapes turned on how that is turning on for just a second. And it's not turning on whenever I'm firing a projectile. So that works as intended. Now, with the melee attack on, I can walk up to this skeleton and I can attack it with my melee skill. But if I were to be standing on the other side and I would attack this way, I'm not hitting him because it's not in that rotation, not in that 50 degrees. So only when I stand on this side, I am attacking him. And if I hit him more and then enough times, then he cannot heal up against that. And there is our melee skill. So that's it for this episode, guys, and unless you guys are really pushing me to make more melee attack skills, this is going to be it for this episode's or this series, I should say, for the combat series. We are going to retain this map and all the programming we've done so far, but we're going to change this into a new series that's going to be focusing on enemy logic. So how can you create a sort of artificial intelligence kind of system where the enemy has a state machine, but that state machine is not 100% rigid, hard-coded. That's actually taking some variance, some randomness, and that the player cannot predict exactly what an enemy is exactly going to do. That of course increases the player experience, as the engagements will be much more fun for the player to actually combat. So that's up for the next series, and I'm probably going to combine that with another series. So we're going to have 2 series running simultaneously, and one will be that player logic and the other is going to be more like a general game engineering, game science kind of stuff that should really help you to push forward your projects as well, and to look at game programming from a completely different perspective, and I think a very important perspective. So if you're ready for that, and if you're curious, then subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon, and again, if you want to chat with me, talk with me, see the development I'm doing myself, look me up on Twitch. All the schedule and the description and the links are down in the comments below. Okay guys, that's it for today. Keep on coding, keep on gaming.